What American commanders said when 8,000 Marines were surrounded on a frozen mountain. The field telephone crackled to life at 3:47 hours, November 28, 1950, and Colonel Homer Litzenberg's hand was already reaching for it before his orderly could move. He'd been awake for 3 minutes. His body clock tuned to danger the way a fox knows when the dogs are closing in. Outside the command post tent, the temperature had dropped to 18 below zero. Inside, his breath came out in white clouds that hung in the lamplight like trapped ghosts. "Sir, it's Captain Barber, Fox Company." The voice on the other end was tight, controlled in the way men sound when they're trying not to scream. "We're under attack, heavy attack, Chinese, thousands of them." Litzenberg pressed the receiver harder against his ear, as if proximity could change what he was hearing. Fox Company was 7 miles south, holding Toktong Pass, the only road back to the coast, the only road home. "How many? I can't count them, sir." A pause filled with the distant crackle of small arms fire. "They're everywhere." 10 miles north, in the village of Yudam-ni, Major General Oliver P. Smith stood over a map table in a schoolhouse that smelled of kerosene and fear. His executive officer had just handed him 3 separate intelligence reports, each one more impossible than the last. Chinese divisions, not regiments, divisions, were moving through the mountains in the darkness, tens of thousands of them, maybe more. Smith's jaw worked slowly, methodically, as if chewing through each implication. Behind him, staff officers waited, their faces illuminated by the yellow glow of Coleman lanterns. One of them cleared his throat. No one spoke. Outside, the wind howled down from the Chosin Reservoir, carrying with it the sound every commander dreads. The distant pop and crackle of small arms fire, spreading like wildfire across the perimeter. 8,000 Marines, surrounded, in the coldest winter Korea had seen in a century. What they said in those first hours, in those first frantic radio transmissions, would never make it into the official histories. But it was real, and it was panic. To understand how 8,000 of America's finest ended up encircled on a frozen mountain, you have to rewind 3 months. To the euphoria of September 1950, when Douglas MacArthur's forces landed at Incheon and turned the tide of a war everyone thought was lost. By October, North Korean resistance had collapsed. The United Nations forces pushed north with breathtaking speed. MacArthur, standing in his command room in Tokyo, grew convinced the war would be over by Christmas. Intelligence reports mentioned Chinese troops massing along the Yalu River, but MacArthur dismissed them. If the Chinese were going to intervene, he told his staff, they would have done it already. In Washington, the Joint Chiefs of Staff weren't so sure. They sent messages urging caution. MacArthur ignored them. On November 24th, he launched what he called the Home by Christmas offensive, a final push to the Chinese border that would, in his mind, end the Korean War. The 1st Marine Division, under Major General Oliver P. Smith, was ordered to advance north from the port of Hungnam, up into the Taebaek Mountains toward the Yalu River. Smith didn't like it, a cautious, methodical officer who'd survived the Pacific War by thinking 3 steps ahead. He saw the terrain and felt his instincts screaming warnings. The route led through a single mountain road that wound through impossible terrain. On one side, sheer cliffs. On the other, frozen lakes and valleys that dropped into darkness. Supply lines would stretch 78 miles through hostile country. If the Chinese attacked in force, if they cut that road, his division would be trapped. In a staff meeting 2 weeks earlier, Smith had voiced his concerns to his regimental commanders. "We are not attacking," he said quietly, smoke from his pipe curling toward the ceiling. "We're advancing in a different direction." It was a joke, but no one laughed. Now, on the night of November 27th, those fears materialized. Chinese commander Song Shilun had moved 120,000 troops into position around the Chosin Reservoir in total secrecy. No radios, no fires. His soldiers marched at night, froze in place during the day, and survived on frozen rice balls carried in their pockets. American reconnaissance flights saw nothing. American intelligence estimated maybe 30,000 Chinese in the entire sector. They were off by 90,000. At dusk on November the 27th, Song Shilun gave the order. Bugles sounded across the mountains, an eerie wailing sound that turned American blood to ice. Then the Chinese came, in human waves that seemed endless, pouring down from ridgelines the Marines didn't even know were occupied. The first radio transmission that broke the illusion came at 22:15 hours from Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Davis, commanding the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. "Regimental, this is Ridge Runner 6. We are under heavy attack. Estimate battalion strength enemy force, maybe more. Request immediate artillery support." Colonel Litzenberg, holding the radio handset, felt his stomach tighten. Battalion strength meant 500 to 1,000 men. In these mountains at night, that was catastrophic. Ridge Runner 6, artillery support approved. Can you hold? A pause. Small arms fire rattled in the background. We'll hold. But they both knew what the silence meant. This wasn't a probe. This was an assault designed to destroy them. 20 minutes later, another transmission, this one from Fox Company at Toktong Pass. Captain William Barber's voice was steady, but beneath it you could hear the tight wire of a man operating on pure adrenaline. We have Chinese in the wire. I say again, Chinese in the wire. They're using grenades and automatic weapons. We need flares. We need everything. Smith stood in the schoolhouse command post, listening. He'd pulled out a cigarette but hadn't lit it yet. His operations officer, Colonel Alpha Bowser, stood beside him, staring at the map as if willing it to reveal something other than the nightmare unfolding before them. How many companies are reporting contact? Smith asked. Bowser didn't look up. All of them. The words hung there like a death sentence. Smith finally lit his cigarette. The flame from his Zippo illuminated his face for just a moment, deeply lined, exhausted, but utterly calm. Get me General Almond. Major General Edward Almond was ex-corps captain, ex-corps commander, Smith's immediate superior, and a man who believed in aggressive action the way some men believe in God. He was also 65 miles south, safely tucked into his headquarters at Ham Hong, where the temperature was merely freezing instead of catastrophic. When Smith got him on the line, Almond's voice was clipped, impatient. What's the situation, OP? We're surrounded. Chinese in division strength, maybe more. All 3 regiments are under attack simultaneously. This isn't a skirmish, Ed. This is a planned operation to annihilate this division. Silence on the other end. Then, can you break out? Smith looked at the map. Yudam-ni to Hagaru-ri, 14 miles of mountain road. Hagaru-ri to Koto-ri, 11 miles. Koto-ri to the coast, 40 miles, every inch of it now crawling with Chinese troops. We're going to have to fight our way out, Smith said. But first we have to consolidate. I need to pull the 5th and 7th Marines back from the west and form a tighter perimeter. Negative, Almond's voice went hard. You will continue the attack. MacArthur wants to reach the Yalu. There is no change to the mission. Smith closed his eyes. For a moment, he said nothing. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet, almost gentle. Ed, I have 8,000 Marines up here. If I try to continue attacking west, they'll be cut to pieces. I'm pulling them back to Yudam-ni. Then we're fighting our way south. That's a retreat. That's survival. He hung up before Almond could respond. At 0300 hours, Smith made the hardest decision of his life. He ordered the 5th and 7th Marines to disengage from their attack west and withdraw to Yudam-ni. It would take 2 days of brutal fighting to pull back 14 miles. Men would die just to go backwards, but if they didn't, everyone would die. 40 miles south, at Hagaru-ri, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Ridge stood on the frozen airstrip and listened to the radio chatter crackling through his command post. Ridge commanded a hodgepodge of engineers, artillerymen, and support troops. Men who'd been building an airstrip when the Chinese attacked. Now they were fighting for their lives. Sir, we've got Chinese inside the perimeter. The voice belonged to a young lieutenant whose name Ridge couldn't remember. They're in the motor pool. Ridge grabbed his rifle. He was 43 years old, a veteran of the Pacific, and he'd never expected to die building an airstrip in Korea. But dying seemed like a real possibility now. The fight at Hagaru-ri was chaos. Chinese troops infiltrated the lines under cover of darkness, using bugles and whistles to coordinate attacks that came in waves. American machine gunners fired until their barrels glowed red. Mortar teams dropped shells so fast the tubes became too hot to touch. By dawn on November 28th, Ridge's perimeter had shrunk by half. Dead Chinese lay in heaps around the machine gun positions, but they kept coming. Ridge got on the radio to Smith. General, I don't know how long we can hold this airstrip. If we lose it, you hold it. Smith's voice was iron. That airstrip is the only way we're getting our wounded out. You hold it, Tom, whatever it takes. Ridge looked at the airstrip, half-finished, cratered by mortar fire, littered with equipment and bodies. Yes, sir. He hung up and turned to his executive officer. Tell every man who can hold a rifle to get on the line. Cooks, clerks, truck drivers, everyone. At Koto-ri, 11 miles south of Hagaru-ri, Lieutenant Colonel Chesty Puller sat in his command post and listened to the reports coming in from the north. Puller was a legend, the most decorated Marine in history, a man who'd fought in Haiti, Nicaragua, Guadalcanal, and Peleliu. He was also 52 years old and exhausted. His executive officer handed him a cup of coffee. Sounds bad up there, sir. Puller took the coffee and stared at the map. Between him and Smith's division were 14 miles of mountain road now swarming with Chinese. If the division tried to break out, they'd have to fight through multiple Chinese divisions in sub-zero weather with limited ammunition and no air support in the darkness. Bad doesn't begin to cover it, Puller said quietly. At 1100 hours on November 28th, a radio message came through from Fox Company at Toktong Pass. Captain Barber's voice was weaker now, strained. We've held through the night, 70% casualties. Chinese are regrouping for another attack. We can see them massing on the ridgeline. Barber didn't say what everyone knew. Fox Company was the cork in the bottle. If they collapsed, the road from Yudam-ni to Hagaru-ri would be severed permanently. The Marines to the north would be cut off with no way out. Smith made a decision that no one, not Almond, not MacArthur, not anyone, would have made. He ordered a relief column to break through to Fox Company, not to pull them out, to reinforce them. I need that road open, Smith told Colonel Litzenberg. Whatever it takes. Litzenberg organized a task force under Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Davis, 350 Marines, moving cross-country through mountains infested with Chinese troops in temperatures hovering near 30 below zero. It was suicide. Davis knew it. His men knew it. They went anyway. For the next 5 days, the chosen reservoir became a frozen hell that would be remembered as one of the most brutal battles in American military history. At Yudam-ni, Smith's Marines fought a desperate 2-day withdrawal back to Hagaru-ri. Every ridge was contested. Every valley became a killing ground. Chinese troops attacked in human waves, often without ammunition, using grenades and bayonets. Marines ran out of ammunition and fought hand to hand. The cold was as deadly as the enemy. Morphine froze in syringes. Blood plasma froze before it could be administered. Wounded men froze to death waiting for evacuation. Weapons jammed. Vehicle engines seized. Men lost fingers and toes to frostbite in hours. One Marine lieutenant, found later by a relief column, had written in his diary, "It's not the Chinese that'll kill us. It's the cold. Everything hurts. Everything's frozen. Can't feel my feet. Can't feel my hands. Just keep moving. That's all there is. Keep moving or die." Davis's relief column reached Fox Company on November the 30th after 2 days of continuous fighting across 12 miles of mountain ridges. They arrived to find Barber's company reduced to 82 effectives from 240 men, but they'd held. The road was open. When Davis entered Barber's command post, a shallow hole in the frozen earth, Barber looked up from where he lay, his leg shattered by shrapnel, his face blackened by frostbite. "Took you long enough," Barber said. Davis smiled. It was the first time he'd smiled in 3 days. "Had to stop for coffee." On December the 6th, the Marine column, now consolidated, began the final push from Hagaru-ri to Koto-ri. It was only 11 miles, but it took 38 hours of continuous combat. The Chinese threw everything they had at the Americans. Artillery, mortars, massed infantry assaults, roadblocks. The Marines fired back with everything: artillery, airstrikes when the weather permitted, tanks, rockets, rifles, grenades. When they ran out of ammunition, they fixed bayonets. At one point, near a place called Hellfire Valley, a Chinese roadblock stopped the column completely. For 6 hours, Marines fought to clear a single hillside. The temperature was 40 below zero. Men fought until they collapsed from exhaustion, then were dragged back, and other men took their place. A correspondent later asked a Marine corporal what it was like. "Like dying," the corporal said, "but slower." In Tokyo, Douglas MacArthur stared at the reports coming in from X-Corps and felt something close to vertigo. His home by Christmas offensive had become a catastrophe. The Chinese hadn't just intervened, they'd arrived in overwhelming force, driving United Nations troops back down the peninsula in the worst American retreat since the Civil War. But at Chosin, something unexpected was happening. The Marines weren't retreating. They were fighting their way out. The difference was semantic, but psychologically crucial. Smith had insisted on it from the beginning. "Retreat! Hell, we're just attacking in a different direction." It wasn't just bravado. Smith had managed to extract his entire division, 8,000 Marines plus 4,000 Army troops attached to his command, through 80 miles of Chinese-controlled territory in sub-zero weather while fighting constantly, and he'd done it without abandoning his wounded. The numbers told the story. The Marines suffered 710, 50 killed, 3,500 wounded, and 200 missing. Chinese casualties were estimated at 25,000 killed and twice that wounded, many of whom froze to death in the mountains after the battle. In Washington, the Joint Chiefs of Staff began to realize what had happened. The Chosin Reservoir wasn't a defeat. It was something else entirely. A fighting withdrawal that had inflicted catastrophic losses on an enemy force 10 times larger. At the Pentagon, General Lawton Collins, Army Chief of Staff, read the reports and shook his head. "The Marines just performed a miracle," he said quietly. "We need to understand how." The answer, it turned out, was leadership. Smith had done everything right. He'd built supply dumps along the route in defiance of orders to advance quickly. He'd insisted on bringing heavy equipment, bulldozers, bridging equipment, that everyone said would slow him down. He'd refused to advance beyond his supply lines, and when the trap closed, he'd kept his head while everyone around him panicked. In one radio transmission, recorded but never publicized, Smith had spoken to a regimental commander who asked if they were going to make it. "We're going to make it," Smith said, "because we have no other choice, and because these are Marines, they don't know how to quit." It was simple, but it was true. The broader implications of Chosin echoed far beyond the frozen mountains of North Korea. First, it shattered MacArthur's credibility. His home by Christmas offensive had been based on catastrophically bad intelligence and wishful thinking. The Chinese intervention caught him completely by surprise, exposing his headquarters as overconfident and isolated from reality. Within months, President Truman would relieve him of command. Second, it changed the nature of the war. The conflict that MacArthur had believed was nearly over would drag on for 2 more years, settling into a grinding stalemate along the 38th parallel. Chosin proved that China was willing to commit massive forces to prevent a UN victory. Third, it revealed something essential about the nature of military leadership under impossible circumstances. Smith had been handed a suicide mission by superiors who didn't understand the terrain, the enemy, or the weather. He'd been ordered to advance when he should have consolidated. He'd been denied reinforcements when he needed them most. And yet, through methodical preparation, unflinching courage, and a deep understanding of his men, he'd brought them out alive. Years later, military historians would study Chosin as a masterclass in tactical withdrawal. But the men who were there understood something simpler. Leadership means staying calm when everything is falling apart. One staff officer remembered a moment in the Hagaru-ri command post when reports were coming in of Chinese attacks from every direction, ammunition was running low, and casualties were mounting. Smith sat at his desk, smoking his pipe, studying a map. "General," the officer said, "are you worried?" Smith looked up. His face was gray with exhaustion. "Worried?" He puffed his pipe. "Son, I've been worried since we left Hungnam, but worry is expensive. It uses energy we need for other things." That was leadership at Chosin. Not fearlessness, but the ability to function while afraid. Not certainty, but the ability to act decisively despite uncertainty. It also revealed something about the Marines themselves. They'd been outnumbered, outgunned, surrounded, and frozen. And they'd fought anyway, not because they thought they'd win, but because quitting wasn't in their vocabulary. A Chinese commander, interviewed after the war, was asked what surprised him most about the Americans at Chosin. "They wouldn't die," he said simply. "We killed them and they kept fighting. We froze them and they kept fighting. We surrounded them and they kept fighting. I don't understand why." The answer was simpler than he knew. They were Marines. On December 11, 1950, the last elements of the 1st Marine Division reached the port of Hungnam and boarded ships for evacuation. Behind them, the mountains of Chosin lay silent under fresh snow, littered with frozen bodies and abandoned equipment. In his quarters aboard the USS Bayfield, General Smith sat alone at a small desk and wrote in his diary. His handwriting, usually precise, was shaky from exhaustion and cold. "We came out," he wrote. "All of us, even the dead." He paused, pen hovering over paper. "I don't know if history will remember this. I don't know if anyone will care. But I know this. Every man who walked out of those mountains is a testament to something rare. Courage without illusion, sacrifice without complaint, and brotherhood in the face of death." He closed the diary and looked out the porthole at the lights of the ships anchored in Hungnam Harbor. Somewhere on those ships were 8,000 Marines, exhausted, frostbitten, wounded, but alive. In the darkness outside, snow began to fall again over the mountains. Smith turned off the lamp and lay down on his bunk, still wearing his boots. Within minutes, he was asleep for the first time in 2 weeks, without the sound of gunfire in his dreams. In the morning, the ships would sail south. But tonight, they had made it home.